Kyle Klingman with Trackwrestling, all the way down to Dallas, Texas. He is an 8-time Fargo champion, 5 junior national titles, what's called now 16U. He's got 3 of those. 3-time state champion for Council Bluffs, Lewis Central. It's David Kjeldgaard. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Great to talk to you, man. You're down in Dallas, Texas right now. Went to Iowa, Council Bluffs, then to Norman with OU. What brought you down to Dallas, Texas? What are you doing right now?
Yeah, so when I was done with school, I actually stayed in Norman for a couple of years, went through business school and helped coach, and then got a job in Dallas working for Trammell Crow Company, which is part of CBRE, commercial real estate company, and been at the same company doing various things for now 17 years. So been here a long time now.
I'm sure everyone wants to know, just like I do, how did the Sooners land you in Norman?
Yeah, oh, it's good. I recently was talking about this with someone the other day. A couple things. One, so I had 2 older brothers, and they wrestled in Northern Iowa. So Northern Iowa was a real option for me, and I really enjoyed it. My time there, and got to know that team and those coaches, and so it was a real option. I ended up visiting Iowa. Considered and visited some of these: Iowa State, Nebraska, Arizona State, Oklahoma State. So I got to see a lot of different schools and consider a lot of different options. There's a couple things that stood out. Mark Manning was the assistant wrestling coach at the time at Oklahoma. I got to know him pretty well. He also went on an overseas trip with him and got to know him really well. And for whatever reason, growing up, I always liked Oklahoma football. I think because all my friends like Nebraska, and Oklahoma could beat Nebraska. And but I felt like the program was great, went through a tough spot and was on its way back up. And then the guys in the team that I got to know and the coaches, and it all kind of clicked together. And there were a lot of elements I liked about the different schools, but there's also that gut factor of, hey, this is the place that feels right to me. It checks enough of the boxes, and at the end of the day, you have to go with where you feel like you step back, you think about it, you pray about it, and you kind of get to a place where you have some peace about it, and I move forward.
Well, what's interesting about that is you graduated high school in 96, so your first season was 97, and then Manning goes to Northern Iowa. Did you think about going with him?
Yeah, well, there was some people that thought that might happen, but I think I quickly became pretty loyal to Oklahoma. So there's a lot of great things going on. It wasn't, and Jack Spates was the head coach there. He was great. I made a bunch of really good buddies immediately at Oklahoma, and so I became a Sooner pretty fast.
If you know your geography of Iowa, it's the eastern half of the state that's known for its wrestling. A lot of the state championships come from there. You have Central Iowa, Iowa State, and then Eastern Iowa, you have Northern Iowa and the University of Iowa. But Western Iowa was really making a push during your time. Why was Western Iowa on that area getting so good during that 90s era?
Well, I have a theory, and part of that is, and again, perspective now that I'm in where I am, I don't even know if I appreciated all of that when I was growing up. Like, I can see it, and people that are maybe older could acknowledge that. I don't know if I appreciated that dynamic. I think Coach Massey had a lot to do with it. I think he built a pretty good system and program, and people bought into it at Lewis Central, but not just Lewis Central, the freestyle and Greco program. And I think sometimes those things just build on top of one another, and it gets rolling, and people get excited, and people started traveling to Council Bluffs, and we were doing camps. And I don't think I knew any different. And looking back, I understand it now, but at the time, it's just what we did. And we bought into what he was teaching and coaching.
Did your brothers have a lot to do with your success? Having older brothers, you see that a lot where the younger brother just has to get tough. Is that the same for you?
Yeah, I think so. They were 4 years and 7 years older. My dad wrestled, and so I kind of grew up. I was the kid walking around, the wrestling room when I was a baby, and so I looked up to them just like any little brother would. I thought the world of them. They were huge supporters of mine. Never put pressure on me, but encouraged me. And the same with my dad. I was very lucky from that standpoint. I never felt pressure to do any of it. Matter of fact, if anything, it was like, hey, if this isn't what you want to do, don't do it. So I really had I was pretty fortunate from that standpoint.
You mentioned Keith Massey, but you can't mention Keith without Denna and Lou. Those guys are really icons in Iowa as far as what they've been able to do and just pushing the sport forward. How well did you get to know them?
Oh, so the Masseys, we were really close with them. Lou Massey was the kids coach, and so he taught me how to do a switch, and then so I got to know Lou and Denna, and we just grew up with them, and obviously you have Keith and Louie Massey that I grew up watching wrestle a little bit before my older brothers, and then so our families were pretty tight, and I think the world of them.
Being the number one wrestler in the country and then being in Iowa at the same time, what was that like being in Council Bluffs? Did you get a lot of people wanting to praise you about that, excited about all your success?
I think so. Again, it's tough in the moment to really fully appreciate it. But looking back, as the success came, there was a decent amount of press, and in Iowa, and specifically even in the school I was at, wrestling became a bigger and bigger part of that school in that area. So it definitely started getting more press and more excitement, which was fun because it fun from the standpoint of the school starting to be rallying behind wrestling, and everybody would go to the state tournament, and then duels became a much bigger and bigger deal as I went through high school, and so that was a lot of fun. And but yeah, it's interesting now to look back and realize it when in the time you're just kind of doing what you can do, trying to win matches and respond to what comes at you.
Looking back now, you just mentioned names. You can go from Brandon Mason to the Paulsons and on down the line with a lot of great talent. Did you feel it at that time that this was just a great pool of wrestling talent coming through?
Yeah, well, I thought that there was. It's hard to tell, but when anytime you give yourself a decade to build a kids program and a middle school program and a high school program, and they start to come through, and you can look down the line and say, you might have a year or two in there, we might not have some kids coming through, but you just see that this isn't a one-off. Every 2 or 3 years, you're going to have some superstars that come through, but at any given time, you're going to have some depth, and you're going to, for the most part, you're going to win most duels just because of the people that want to be a part of the program. They're winning, they're well known. You have a bunch of kids, even if you have 10% of the kids that are in kids wrestling, if they stick to it, they're going to do well. And so you could see that it was going to continue.
As we mentioned, 8 Fargo titles, 3 cadet, and 5 junior national titles. What was that like going through that and reaching such a high level in high school?
Well, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I really enjoyed freestyle and Greco. I don't know if there was just some freedom, and it felt a little more free to me, and in the sense of it was post regular season, and then it was when we joke around and say when the real wrestling starts, because that's what the rest of the world wrestled. And it was just a ton of fun to me, and I felt like I wrestled with a little bit more. I guess freedom is the only word that kind of comes to mind. But I really look forward to it. I mean, when season was over and it was time to go in and have freestyle and Greco practices, you'd sync up with and work out with guys from a bunch of different schools. You're traveling on the weekends and seeing some buddies across the state. I mean, those were really good times where you look back, you did some camps, and you're really intense for a couple weeks in a row, and you just grew a ton and learned a bunch from some of the best of the best. So it was a ton of fun, and I love those tournaments, those long, grueling cadet and junior national tournaments. When you get into those back-to-back matches on those long days, that was when I enjoyed it the most, because there's no warming up, there's no cooling down. You just wrestle, and then 30, 40 minutes later, wrestling again. And so I enjoy those tournaments a lot.
And then when you get to leave and you have hardware, you got multiple stop signs. That's feel good too.
Yeah, that always made whatever pain or soreness feel a little bit better. That's for sure.
Did you get into the trading singlets outside the arena?
Yeah, a little bit. I did more. My brothers wrestled and wrestled at these tournaments, and I had gone to some of the tournaments, and it was a lot more trading T-shirts than the singlets, but I definitely got involved with that. And But it was a lot of fun because I'd come back with a bunch of different different T-shirts from a bunch of different states. But yeah, I enjoyed it.
And were yours all in Fargo?
No, I had Columbia, Missouri was where Cadet Nationals and Junior Nationals were separate. And Cadet Nationals, when I wrestled both years, was in Columbia, Missouri.
Okay. What is it about Fargo, though? What is it about the Junior Nationals and winning that really holds a high place? Because we're on the cusp of 50 years here, potentially, if they wouldn't have canceled. But what is it about that tournament?
Yeah, it's hard to, I guess, put it into words. I guess everybody around the country at that point in time, that was the tournament where the best go and wrestle. And there wasn't as much, the internet as it relates to tracking and knowing where everybody stands and who's doing what was just kind of starting to roll, and tracking where other people were. But you just knew that the best of the best were going to be there. And from my standpoint, I wasn't one that studied everybody. I just knew that the best guys from all different states were going to be there. And I just looked forward to the tournament because at some level, I knew that whoever I was wrestling was probably a state champ or did really well. And it could be from any one of 50 states. And it was just a good chance to see where you're stacking up. I came in when I was a freshman, not really realizing what to expect, especially at junior nationals. And it was just a lot of fun because earlier that year I wrestled some kids that had done well at junior national. I had no idea, again, just because it's hard to track who's who, and I competed well against them. And so it kind of, opened your eyes a little bit to say, this is a tournament that I can go in and compete in. So.
Were you a wrestling junkie? Did you follow the sport?
I really wasn't. I loved, let me say it differently. I wasn't a junkie in the sense of studying who was who and what they've done and where they've been. But I loved the sport itself, and I liked to just come up with different moves and just different positions. And I loved being around it. Like, I enjoyed being in the wrestling room. I wasn't one that dreaded, putting my shoes on because of whatever reason. I liked it, and I wanted to be around it. So it was more of a love of the sport itself versus what all's going on around it. But that's a little bit potentially my personality, and just the process, the training that went into it, the process to get to put yourself in the best position possible to win. That in and of itself was fun for me. What can I do each day to put myself in the best position to have a shot at winning? And that was I got a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Does that mean you weren't watching Iowa public television? You weren't watching Iowa State? You were just in your own world?
No, I would watch that. So I would definitely, if it was on TV, and again, a couple older brothers and a dad, so I was around. I would watch it as it relates to that. But I do remember going to tournaments where I would have my friends tell me, "Hey, this is so and so, my teammates. This is so and so. He's done X, Y, and Z," and I wouldn't know that. I would be the one that was going to be wrestling them. So I would be aware. I would know of the good guys and who they are and what they've done. But I wasn't one that studied it. I didn't get all the subscriptions and go through all of them and understand who they were. I knew a base level, expected level, but I didn't go much further than that. And part of it was I don't know if I necessarily wanted to. I wasn't one that wanted to study everybody I was going to wrestle. I'd rather just go out and get after it and not have that in my head.
Going to Oklahoma, when I think your career, I just think of an injury-plagued career when you're at OU. When did the injury start, and how bad did it get?
Yeah. So my freshman year, I'd say probably one of the last healthy matches, I was wrestling Stephen Schmidt from Oklahoma State, and he was returning, ranked number 1, returning All-American. And we had a really great match. He won, took me down at the very end and won. And that was my first loss in college. And then I think it was a couple days later, it was right before the Christmas break, is when I first hurt my knee pretty seriously. I had had a couple scopes before, but that was actually a torn MCL. And I don't know, that just sparked a string of of related but different injuries to that same knee. And so then I tried to come back at the end of the season and tweaked it again just before Big 12s. And then my sophomore year, then I had another right at the beginning of the year. I hurt my knee. I came back, but was not in a just for various reasons was not in a good position that year. It was up a weight class and just a handful of different things. In my junior year, I was really healthy. Started having a pretty good year. I felt like for the first time since I was a freshman, I was able to compete, but I still had a little bit of work to do. And a pretty healthy year. And then just before Big 12s, I hurt my knee again. This was really more cartilage, the same knee. And then that was from that point forward, I'd never really wrestled again with a healthy knee. I went through the Big 12s, got to the finals, and then forfeited, and then tried to compete at NCAA's, but it was not in good. I was hurting pretty good, and then I never wrestled again. I got a 6 year of eligibility. I had a handful of additional surgeries, and just never got back. I think I don't remember. I think I had 8 or 9 surgeries, and just was never able to get back.
What makes you stick with it? What makes you say, I want to see this all the way through and not drop out maybe after your freshman year?
Well, looking back and regretting things is a pretty tough position to be in. And it really wasn't, one, I don't even think I really considered it. But two, you want to walk away thinking, hey, I did all that I possibly could. Now, you don't want to look, with perspective, you don't want to do something that's going to really put you in a bad spot and risk, your future for sure. But I never viewed it that way. I viewed it as, hey, this is a knee. It's a knee injury. I'm going to take this as far as I can take it and continue to do whatever I can do to come back. And I can look back and say, look, I gave it the best I could. I continued to come back. I tried to rehab it, tried to train, tried to get back in a position to be healthy to compete, and just couldn't get there. And if I can walk away saying that versus, hey, I wonder if, that's a much different feeling.
Is it something you still battle with today?
No, not really. I really don't. I think I was fortunate. I have a pretty good perspective growing up that I fundamentally believe. Well, I think I clearly have a different overall belief system and maturity today. Even at that time, I think there was some understanding that it's not all about wrestling. And wrestling and sports are great, but it's because it teaches you certain things about life. At the end of the day, no one wrestles for their entire life. And looking back today, I think that all these various things have happened, including going to Oklahoma, including injuries, have resulted in me being in the position I'm in, which I wouldn't trade for anything. And so I don't, and I'm not one that looks back. I don't spend or waste mind space on some of those things because it just doesn't put you in a good spot. Now, don't get me wrong. It hurts bad when you've trained your entire life and you want to be able to reach some goals and to fall way, way short. That does not feel good. It doesn't feel good for anybody. It didn't feel good for me. And so there was definitely pain, but I didn't go to dark places, and I didn't, and it definitely doesn't hang with me today. Now, would I've loved to be able to compete and see how far I could go and see what I could do? Absolutely. But you know what? There's a ton of people that have all sorts of things, whether it's injuries, personal things that come up that just don't allow them to end up doing what they want to do. And I'm one of those.
What place does wrestling hold with you today in 2020?
What place? Like,
yeah, are you involved? Do you think about it? Do you care about it?
Sure. No, I'll forever be connected to it. I definitely track it and follow it. 3 young kids, and so with the job and 3 young kids, you have a lot of time focused on that. But ever since I moved to Dallas, we started a program. Ed Mosley from Harvard, Ty Wilcox from Oklahoma State, and ultimately Brandon Slay. We all helped get a program going in Dallas at one point in time that ran for several years. And then now I have a 7 and 5-year-old, and we have a little kids. I kind of help out with the little kids program here. So I'll always be involved in some way, shape, or form. It might look different depending on my kids' interests if they want to continue to do it. but I think there's an obligation on us that for those of us that have been around it to do all we can for the sport. And I want to do it and I enjoy doing it. So that's an added bonus.
Does being from Iowa give you street cred?
For the people that understand it, absolutely. For a lot of people that, I just telling somebody the difference between, say, Iowa and Texas is it's a little bit of a first generation sport for the most part. You have a lot of kids whose parents were never even around wrestling. And so you're almost introducing the parents and the kids to wrestling. Whereas, 90% of the people, 90% of the kids that are wrestling in Iowa, while their parents, mom or dad, it may not have been directly involved with wrestling, they're aware, they've been around it, they get it at some level. But there's great talent and great talent in Texas, as you see guys like Jack Mueller and Bo Nickel, and these guys are from the Dallas area, right? And they've done great things. So
You talked about the lessons you learned from wrestling. What lessons have you acquired and you use today in your current profession?
it's good. It's a good question. It's funny. I literally had this conversation with my son last night. It is interesting. There's the saying that once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think there's a lot of life sometimes is much more complicated than wrestling. Sometimes wrestling, you can be very focused and single-minded and just go make it happen. Life, there's a lot of things at you. But I fundamentally believe that whether it's just tough things you work through in a job where you just got to grit through it and you're not sure what to do. If you've been in really tough situations your whole life, where it's just a matter of kind of gritting your teeth and being tough and not kind of folding shop like you see so many people do, I fundamentally believe a lot of that comes from a wrestling background where like nothing was easy. If every day you pushed yourself mentally and physically in practice for 15 years or whatever it is, that has a lasting impact. It's hard to measure, but I do see it often in the workplace where people get pretty shaken up pretty easily when various things come at them. But if you're used to dealing with it, it just isn't as big of an issue.
Speak on Jack Spates and what he has meant to you. He was the head coach at that time. What was it about him that you were drawn to and wanted to continue to be coached by, even though Coach Mark Manning went elsewhere?
Yeah, no, look, I think Jack's great. He was when he came and recruited me. Frankly, I didn't know him as well as some of the other coaches, but I will say what he did do is obviously coming into Oklahoma with high expectations, and I'm sure he had high expectations. I had high expectations. There wasn't a moment where I didn't feel like he didn't have my back. And so through injuries, through not performing and doing the things I wanted to do, he was always supportive, and at times would send me a letter, write me a letter, and try to encourage me. So he was really supportive, and it was really helpful. So he all along in the whole process has been helpful, and I'll still run into him. He does some color commentary at Oklahoma, and so he's been good. And he's brought in when I was there, he's brought in Chuck Barbie was there, Barry Weldon was there. Started off with Mark Manning, so he's continued to surround himself by really, really strong assistants. And he's for that reason and many others, he's a good head coach that knew how to bring in talent, knew how to bring in other coaches around him, and he if you look at the career, you can see some of the groups that he brought in and what they did.
We are on the cusp of the 20-year anniversary of Brandon Slay winning a gold medal in the Sydney Olympics, and you're roommates with him. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's really random. So I was when I was done with school at Oklahoma in wrestling, I went down to Dallas, got a job in commercial real estate, and I'd heard that Brandon may be moving to Dallas, and we had connected in various ways, but I didn't really know him personally that well. Make a long story short, he ends up getting a job in commercial real estate, which is at a competing firm, but literally across the street from where I worked. He was living within a block of where I lived, and we were going to the same church, and so we ended up just connecting and saying, hey, all these things just seem to line up. And so we we obviously were buddies and started talking about getting a wrestling program, talking about the wrestling program. We started helping coaching there, and ultimately we ended up being roommates, and we're good buddy, became good buddies and are to this day.
We mentioned some of your credentials. You have state championships and junior national titles. Presumably junior nationals is tougher to win, but when you walk through the hallways of your high school, what means more to the high school population?
You know what? It's a good question. I don't know that answer. I would guess for those that know, for the wrestlers that understand it, would probably be the junior national titles because they understand it. For the probably the normal population, they may not know or fully appreciate what junior nationals is, and so they'll be focused on the folk style titles, the high school titles. But yeah, both obviously mean a lot.
I don't know if you've been back to the state tournament. They've changed locations in Des Moines. It's at Wells Fargo, but you wrestled in a place affectionately known as the Barn. What was it like winning titles in that place?
No, it was fun. Again, perspective is helpful, and it was great. I recently saw someone sent me a YouTube video, and it showed the Grand March, and I remember being down in the basement, and you can hear the announcer. So just remembering some of those elements of the high school state tournament, and again, now looking back and remembering and being able to remember it pretty well is really fun because it was a unique environment, was a unique place, always sold out, yet it was done so well. Just a quick story on that. When I knew of Iowa having great wrestling, I knew of Oklahoma having great wrestling. Went to school at Oklahoma. I went to the Oklahoma high school state tournament, not to be negative on that tournament, but I don't know that I fully appreciated what the Iowa high school state wrestling tournament was until I saw some other great states that have great wrestling states, and I've seen some of their high school tournaments, and just picking out Oklahoma because I was there. Great tournament, great wrestlers, but it's very different. It wasn't the packed barn like we experienced. It didn't have the organ music that played. It didn't have all the elements that would go into what you experience at the Iowa high school state tournament.
Thinking about Iowa too, of course, Dan Gable is always connected with the state. So just based on what you said and your personality, did Gable not have the pedestal for you that it might for some other high school wrestlers?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if I thought about it that way. I mean, he definitely, I'd had conversations with him, and I thought the world of him and what he had accomplished. But yeah, I don't know that I put him or people generally up on the pedestal of like, hey, I would do anything to go be coached by him. Respected him and respected the heck out of him and what he did. And by the way, even once I decided to go to Oklahoma, just the way that we interacted immediately after and following, still have a world of respect for him. I don't know how you cannot, but yes, I don't know. That may have played an element. The other part is I just didn't grow up being a Hawkeye fan. Again, my brothers went to Northern Iowa. They were actually the team that wrestled against Northern Iowa at some level. But that may have played a factor into it. But it was definitely I definitely considered, especially late before I made the decision, that Iowa definitely became a very compelling school as I was considering where to go.
Final question: if you are forced into a wrestling match, what would be your go-to move? What would you want to hit?
Today?
Yeah, today.
Well, I'd probably not take a deep shot. I would I'd probably pull someone down in front headlock. Get around behind them.